The dog sleeps outside, Violet. So do you. The words hung in the air, colder than the gust of wind that tore through the open doorway. Amanda, my daughter-in-law, smiled a tight, polished smile, her lipstick a slash of red in the warm light of the hall. Behind her, I could see the faint glow of the birthday candles on the cake I'd spent all afternoon baking. A cake I would not be eating. The blizzard howled, a living thing clawing at my thin cardigan. I clutched the fabric at my throat, a useless gesture against the sudden shocking cold. My breath plumed in front of my face, a ghost of the life still in me. I looked past her, searching for my son, for Mark. He was standing in the archway to the living room, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the hardwood floor. He was studying the grain of the wood as if it held the secrets of the universe, anything to avoid looking at me. Mark. My voice was a brittle thing easily snapped. It was barely a whisper swallowed by the wind. Amanda's smile didn't falter. It widened. He can't help you, Violet. This is our house now. Our rules. She didn't push me. She didn't have to. She simply stepped back, her hand still on the heavy oak door I had chosen myself 20 years ago. The door my husband, David, and I had hung together. Her manicured fingers were wrapped around the cold brass handle. Then the sound. Not a slam, nothing so dramatic. Just a soft, definitive click. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. A sound of finality. A sound that locked me out of my life. It was my 72nd birthday. For a moment I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the porch steps, the snow already beginning to collect on my slippers. The shock was a physical thing. A sheet of ice forming over my skin, encasing my heart. My mind refused to process it. This had to be a joke. A cruel, terrible joke. Any second now the door would swing open. Mark would be there, laughing sheepishly, telling Amanda she'd gone too far. He would wrap his arm around me and lead me back inside, to the warmth, to the cake. But the door remained shut. The light in the hallway was extinguished, plunging the porch into a deeper darkness, broken only by the swirling, hypnotic dance of the snow under the single weak porch light. The wind was a physical blow, shoving me, trying to push me off the steps and into the accumulating drifts. My ears began to ache from the cold, a deep piercing pain. I raised a hand, my fingers stiff and clumsy, and knocked. Once. Twice. The sound was pathetic, a dull thud absorbed by the thick wood and the storm's fury. No one would hear it, or no one would answer. I tried the handle. It was rigid, unmoving. Locked. Of course it was locked. She had told me it would be. My body finally caught up with my mind. A tremor started in my hands and spread through my entire frame. A violent, uncontrollable shiver that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with the chasm that had just opened up beneath me. I stumbled back from the door, my slippers sinking into the snow, the icy wetness immediately seeping through the thin fabric. I had to see. I had to understand. My feet, numb and clumsy, carried me sideways, off the porch and into the deeper snow of the yard. I trudged toward the side of the house, toward the light. The large picture window by the hearth. The one David and I had installed so we could watch the snow fall while sitting by the fire. It was a window designed for comfort, for peace. Now it was a screen for my own personal horror film. The glass was feathered with frost, distorting the scene within. I lifted a trembling, gloved hand and wiped a clear circle, my warm breath clouding it almost as fast as I could clear it. And then I saw them. The living room was bathed in a golden glow from the fireplace. The fire I had laid myself that morning. On the coffee table sat 2 champagne flutes bubbling. And there they were. Amanda was curled up on the sofa, her feet tucked under her, a triumphant look on her face. And Mark was sitting beside her. He had his arm around her. He was smiling. He raised his glass to her, and they clinked them together in a toast. A toast. While I was standing outside freezing. My mind reeled. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a celebration. Amanda picked up her phone, propping it against a stack of coffee table books I had given them for Christmas. Her face was animated, talking to the tiny lens. She was live, broadcasting her victory. I pressed my face closer to the freezing glass, the cold a searing pain against my cheek. I could just make out the screen, the little hearts floating up the side, and the comments a blurry stream of text. But the caption, the one she had typed at the top, was cruelly clear, even through the swirling snow in my tear-filled eyes. Finally, some peace and quiet. Empty nest. The hashtag was a punch to the gut. Empty nest. Was that what I was? Just a bird to be pushed out when my purpose was served? The sickness rose in my throat, hot and acidic. I felt a wave of dizziness, and I pressed my forehead against the window pane to steady myself, the icy glass a small sharp shock that anchored me to the moment. I was a ghost in my own home. I looked around the room through the window at the life that was no longer mine. Every single object held a memory. The worn leather armchair in the corner was where David used to sit and read the paper every Sunday. The faint scratches on the floorboards near the door were from Mark's puppy Buster, more than 30 years ago. The mantelpiece, which I had designed myself from a piece of reclaimed barn wood, held photos of our family. Of Mark as a baby, of his high school graduation, of his wedding to the woman who was now toasting to my absence. I had designed this house. I was an architect. I had sketched every line, chosen every material, overseen every nail hammered into place. I knew its secrets. I knew the way the stairs creaked on the third step, the way the morning light hit the kitchen island, the way the wind whistled through the old eaves during a storm just like this one. This house was more than wood and stone. It was an extension of me, a vessel for the memories of the life I had built with my husband. And now I was on the outside looking in, a stranger to my own creation. The warmth inside, the golden light, it all seemed like a mockery. A diorama of a happy life that I was no longer a part of. Mark laughed at something Amanda said, throwing his head back. It was a full, genuine laugh. The kind I hadn't heard from him in years. The kind he used to share with me. The sound was lost to the storm, but I could see it on his face. He was happy. He was relieved. He was free. The realization settled in my bones, a cold more profound than the blizzard. I wasn't just an inconvenience. I was a burden, a piece of old furniture they were finally glad to be rid of. The peace and quiet Amanda wrote about wasn't about noise. It was about my presence. My very existence had been the disturbance in their perfect life. The snow was falling harder now, thick and heavy. My gray hair was matted with it, my thin clothes soaked through. The shivering had become a deep internal quake. I was losing feeling in my toes. I knew with a detached sort of clarity that this was dangerous. The temperature was dropping fast. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the window, from the brutal spectacle of my own erasure. Amanda held up the phone, turning it to face the fireplace, then the Christmas tree. Then she angled it for a selfie with Mark, both of them beaming. They were showing off their prize. The house. The life. My life. And to their audience, their friends, the anonymous eyes on the internet, I simply didn't exist. I was the secret in the snow, the ghost at the feast, watching my own wake. The wind shrieked, a long mournful cry that echoed the desolation in my soul. I was alone. Utterly and completely alone on my 72nd birthday, watching my only son celebrate my disappearance. The house, my beautiful beloved house, felt like a tomb. And I wasn't even allowed inside. My name is Violet. I am 72 years old. A retired architect. A widow. There was a time when those words felt like a complete sentence. A description of a life fully rendered. Its blueprints finalized. I once believed my life's great work was the homes I designed. Structures of glass and wood and stone that captured the California light. I built spaces where families could breathe, where memories could settle into the walls like a faint, pleasant scent. My husband David used to joke that I didn't build houses, I built sanctuaries. He was a man who saw the poetry in a well-placed window, the love in a sturdy foundation. For 47 years our own sanctuary was a sprawling ranch-style home overlooking a canyon, a place I had designed myself. Every morning the sun would spill into our kitchen, and the air would smell of jasmine and salt from the distant ocean. David and I would sit with our coffee, the silence between us as comfortable as a favorite chair. We raised our son Mark in that house. We watched him take his first steps on the cool terracotta tiles and taught him to ride his bike in the long winding driveway. I thought the foundation of our family was as solid as the bedrock beneath that house. I believed family was the only blueprint that truly mattered, the one design that could withstand any storm. When David passed, the California light seemed to dim. The house, once so full of his laughter and quiet presence, felt vast and hollow. The silence was no longer comfortable, it was a gaping void. But I had Mark. He was my purpose, the continuing legacy of the love David and I had built. He had moved to a place called Aspen Creek, a town that sounded like a postcard, all snowy peaks and cozy ambitions. He had a wife, Amanda, and a tech startup that he spoke of with a burning, feverish excitement that reminded me so much of his father. I was proud. I saw his ambition as a reflection of the best parts of us. Then came the phone call. It was late, and the rain was streaking down the large glass windows of my living room. Mark's voice on the other end was frayed, thin, and desperate. He spoke of market downturns, investor pullouts, and catastrophic miscalculations. The words were jargon, but the meaning was simple and ancient: failure. His dream was collapsing, and it was taking everything with it: his savings, his home, his marriage. He was drowning. "I'm losing it all, Mom," he choked out, and in that moment, he wasn't a grown man with a company. He was the little boy who used to run to me with a scraped knee. A mother doesn't deliberate in a moment like that. There is no pro and con list. There is only the instinct to heal, to mend, to make it right. What was a house of memories compared to the future of my only child? The jasmine-scented air, the ocean breeze, the 47 years of ghosts, they were luxuries. My son's survival was a necessity, so I made the decision. I put my sanctuary, my life's work, on the market. I sold the house I had designed for David and me, the house I thought I would live in until my own light went out. I packed away our life into cardboard boxes, each one a small tomb for a cherished memory. The real estate agent, a kind woman with sad eyes, said I was brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was performing a necessary amputation. The check from the sale, the number that was supposed to represent the value of my home, felt weightless in my hand. I wired every last cent to Mark. I paid off the debts of his collapsed dream, and then, with 2 suitcases and a heart full of fragile hope, I moved to Aspen Creek to live with him and Amanda, believing I was reinforcing our family's foundation for a new chapter. I was an architect, after all. I knew how to build. I believed we could build again, together. I gave them everything. Not just the money from the house, but everything that followed. My savings, meticulously gathered over a lifetime of careful planning, were offered up to help them get back on their feet. My pension, the steady income David and I had planned for our quiet golden years, was deposited directly into their joint account to help with the mortgage on the new place. I signed papers they put in front of me, my architect's eye for detail blurred by a foolish maternal trust. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to be a partner in this new life, not a passenger. I wanted to prove that my sacrifice was an investment, not a loss. In return, they gave me the basement. The room was at the bottom of a steep flight of stairs, tucked behind a door that didn't quite latch. It was small and perpetually damp, with a single high window that offered a view of a concrete window well and the occasional skittering spider. My only roommate was the hulking water heater in the corner. It was a constant companion, humming and groaning through the night, a metallic beast sighing in the dark. In California, I had woken to the sun. Here, I woke to the shudder of the furnace kicking on or the gurgle of pipes as someone flushed a toilet on the floor above me. The sound of their life, happening far above my head. First, I told myself it was temporary, a practical arrangement while they sorted things out. I would spend my days trying to be useful, cleaning a house that was already sterile, offering to cook meals that were often rejected in favor of takeout. I tried to recreate the warmth of my California kitchen, but my efforts seemed to clash with Amanda's sleek, minimalist aesthetic. My presence, like my furniture that they put in storage, didn't quite fit. The kindness, the gratitude I had expected, began to curdle so slowly I barely noticed it at first. It was like milk left out on the counter, turning sour in imperceptible increments. Started with small things. A sigh from Amanda when I asked a question. Mark looking at his phone while I tried to tell him a story about his father. An unspoken agreement that I would eat my dinner on a tray in the living room while they ate at the dining table. Then the whispers started. I have always had good hearing. It's a quiet sense, one that people forget about. They see the gray hair and the lines on my face and assume all my faculties are fading in unison. They were wrong. I was coming up the basement stairs one evening, my hand trailing along the cold wall for balance, when I heard Amanda's voice from the kitchen. It was sharp and clear, laced with an irritation she didn't bother to hide when she thought I was out of earshot. She was on the phone, her voice a stage whisper. "Oh, Mark's mother," she said, followed by a dry, humorless laugh. "Yes, she's still here. Our little charity case. I swear, I feel like I'm running a non-profit for the tragically sentimental." The word struck me with a physical force. I froze on the stairs, my hand gripping the railing. Charity case. The phrase echoed in the narrow stairwell. It was ugly and sharp-edged. It redefined my sacrifice, twisting it from an act of love into a pathetic plea for shelter. All the money, the house, the pension, it hadn't been an investment in my family's future. It had been the price of admission to this cold basement room, a ticket that branded me as a burden. My first instinct was to turn around, to go back down into the damp and the dark and pretend I hadn't heard. My second was to march up the rest of the stairs and confront her, to show her the bank statements, the deed to my sold home, to demand she take back those cruel, dismissive words. But my feet felt like they were cemented to the steps. What would I say? What would it accomplish? Mark would be caught in the middle. There would be a fight. The fragile piece of the house would shatter. And where would I go? I had built my life around them. I had designed my entire world to fit inside their home. I was the architect of my own cage, and I had just heard the lock click shut. So I did what I would learn to do again and again. I took a slow, silent breath. I retreated. I crept back down the stairs, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the hum of the water heater. And when Amanda called down a few minutes later, her voice falsely sweet, asking if I wanted the leftovers from their dinner, I called back up, my own voice a carefully constructed imitation of my former self. "No thank you, dear," I said. "I'm not very hungry." I pretended I couldn't hear the lie in my voice. I pretended I hadn't heard the truth in hers. I pretended I was not a prisoner. I pretended this was still a home. The days bled into one another, each a fresh page in a book of quiet sorrows. Dinner became the most potent ritual of my invisibility. The scent of their food would drift down the basement stairs first, a herald of what I was not allowed to have. It was never the smell of home cooking, of onions browning in a pan or a roast filling the house with warmth. It was the sharp, exotic perfume of Thai green curry, the greasy, satisfying promise of gourmet burgers, or the delicate aroma of sushi rice and nori. The doorbell would ring, a cheerful chime that announced the arrival of a delivery driver, a stranger who was granted more warmth and welcome than I was. I would hear their footsteps, the rustle of paper bags, the clink of ceramic plates being set on the solid oak dining table upstairs. Then, after a long pause, Amanda's voice would call down, stripped of any warmth. "Vi, your food's on the counter." I learned not to come up too soon. I had to wait until they were seated, until their own meals were unwrapped and their conversation had begun. To intrude on that moment was a sin of presence, a reminder that I existed, and they did not like to be reminded. So I would wait in the damp chill, listening to the muffled sounds of their life above me, until I judged it was safe to emerge. My meal was always the same. Their leftovers from the night before, scraped onto a flimsy white plastic plate, the kind you buy for a child's birthday party. Tonight, it was a congealed lump of what had once been chicken stir-fry. A few lonely strips of bell pepper lay limp and defeated next to rice that had hardened into a single cohesive puck. The plastic plate bent precariously in my hand as I carried it. I wasn't permitted to sit at the dining table with them. That space was for family, and I was, as I'd once overheard Amanda tell a friend on the phone, a long-term humanitarian project. My designated spot was a small, wobbly stool at the far end of the kitchen island, the one with the cracked vinyl seat. From there I had a clear view of them. They sat under the warm glow of the chandelier I had picked out years ago, the light catching the steam rising from their bowls. Mark, my son, was hunched over his phone, his thumb flicking in a hypnotic rhythm. He shoveled food into his mouth without looking at it, his eyes glazed over by the blue light of the screen. Amanda ate with performative delicacy, holding her chopsticks just so, her own phone propped up against a bottle of sriracha, playing a video of a makeup tutorial. They didn't speak to me. They rarely even looked in my direction. Their conversation was a web of inside jokes, complaints about work, and plans for a weekend I would not be a part of. I was a ghost at their feast, present only as a set of ears for their casual cruelty. The fork scraped against the plastic of my plate, a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the quiet pockets between their laughter. The food was cold. It tasted of the refrigerator of yesterday. I ate it slowly, methodically, because chewing was something to do, an act that proved I was still a living creature. One evening, after finishing my meager portion, I was rinsing my plate in the sink when I noticed a new jar of artisanal pickles on the counter. It was my favorite kind, the ones with dill and whole cloves of garlic. A small, foolish flicker of warmth sparked in my chest. Maybe Mark had remembered. He used to love how I'd put them on his sandwiches as a boy. My hand, stiff with arthritis, fumbled with the lid. It was screwed on tight, a vacuum seal of industrial strength. I twisted, my knuckles white with effort, but it wouldn't budge. I tried running it under hot water, a trick my own mother had taught me. Still nothing. My breath came in short, frustrated gasps. Having some trouble there, Vi? Amanda's voice was slick with false sweetness. I turned, startled. She was standing there, her phone in her hand, the little red light indicating it was recording. It's just a bit tight, I mumbled, my face flushing with embarrassment. Here, let me get a good angle, she said, moving closer. The kids on TikTok love this stuff. The generational struggle. She laughed, a sharp metallic sound. Mark glanced up from his phone, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before he looked away, back into the void of his screen. He didn't say a word. Amanda directed me like a film director. Okay, now try again. Really put your back into it. Come on, you design skyscrapers, you can open a pickle jar. Her words were a mockery of a life I could barely remember. A life of competence and strength. Now my hands trembled, not just from the effort but from the humiliation. The phone's black, unblinking lens felt like 1,000 eyes staring at my weakness. I gave one last, desperate twist. A sharp pain shot through my wrist and I gasped, letting go of the jar with a clatter. Oh well, Amanda sighed, ending the recording with a flourish. Guess it's a job for a millennial. She took the jar and with a single effortless pop the seal broke. She didn't offer me a pickle. She just put the jar in the fridge and walked away, tapping at her screen. Later that night, unable to sleep, I heard them laughing from the living room. I crept to the top of the basement stairs, my body aching with a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I could hear the tinny audio from Amanda's phone. It was my video. I could hear my own grunts of effort, amplified and distorted. And then I heard the caption she read aloud to Mark. When the boomer tech support fails. I added a laughing emoji. Look, Mark, it's already got 1,000 likes. 1,000 likes. 1,000 strangers laughing at a weak-old woman. Each like was a tiny sharp pebble thrown at my dignity. I retreated back into the darkness of the basement, the sound of their laughter echoing behind me, a soundtrack to my shame. The degradations were not always so public. More often they were quiet, intimate, designed for an audience of one. The basement had a particular smell, a combination of damp concrete, and the faint, musty scent of things long stored and forgotten. Clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. I became hyper-aware of it, scrubbing myself with cheap, unscented soap, washing my few outfits over and over in the ancient machine in the corner. But I could never escape it. Amanda made sure I knew that. She smells like old paper and regret, she would announce to Mark whenever I entered a room. It was never a whisper. It was a clear, declarative statement, thrown into the air between them like a dart aimed squarely at my heart. She'd say it while I was just trying to get a glass of water, or as I passed through the living room on my way to the bathroom. The first time she said it, I froze, my hand hovering over the faucet. I thought I must have misheard. But then I saw the faint smirk on her face, the way she watched me for a reaction. And Mark, my son, he never defended me. He wouldn't even flinch. He would just stare at his phone, his face illuminated by its cold light, his thumb scrolling through Twitter, through a world that was more real to him than the one in his own living room. He had become a ghost in his own marriage, a silent accomplice to my daily erasure. His silence was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. It was an endorsement. It told Amanda that her words were acceptable. It told me that my pain was irrelevant. The insult became a theme. Amanda started buying plug-in air fresheners, dozens of them. The house soon reeked of an aggressive chemical ocean breeze, a cloying vanilla bean, a synthetic field of lavender. Every room upstairs was saturated with it. Every room except my basement. The invisible line was drawn at the top of the stairs. Down there I was left to my old paper and regret. Sometimes, if I entered the living room while she was there, she would theatrically pick up a can of Febreze and spray the air around her, a wordless public fumigation of my presence. I learned to make myself small, to move along the edges of rooms, to hold my breath as I passed, as if I could somehow minimize the offense of my own existence. I was a burden, and a burden should not take up space. A burden should not have a scent. The days grew colder. A damp, penetrating chill set into the foundation of the house and radiated up through the concrete floor of my room. My thin blankets offered little comfort. My fingers were always stiff, my joints a constant dull ache. It was on one of these particularly cold afternoons that Amanda came down the stairs. Her descent was unusual. She avoided the basement as if it were a tomb. She was wearing a bright pink sweater and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She carried a clipboard and a pen. "Hey Vi," she said, her voice dripping with a syrupy concern that set every nerve in my body on edge. "I was just getting some paperwork in order, and I realized we never sorted out your emergency medical forms. You know, with your health it's better to be safe than sorry." She gestured vaguely, as if my health were a well-known and deteriorating crisis. I was old, yes, and I was tired, but I was not infirm. Still, her words planted a seed of fear. An emergency. What if I fell? What if something happened in the night? Who would help me? What kind of forms? I asked, my voice raspy. "Oh, just standard stuff," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It just gives us permission to make medical decisions for you if you can't. You know, in case of an emergency. It makes things so much easier with the doctors." She presented me with a thick stack of papers, at least 20 pages, filled with dense, legal text that swam before my eyes in the dim light of the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. My good reading glasses were upstairs, on the nightstand in the room that used to be mine. I didn't dare ask for them. "I don't know, Amanda," I began, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "Vi, don't be difficult," she chided gently, her tone shifting. It was the voice of a patient parent dealing with a stubborn child. "This is for your own good. I'm just trying to take care of you." My hands were trembling, partly from the cold, partly from a nameless dread. The chill from the concrete floor seemed to be seeping directly into my bones. I just wanted her to leave. I wanted to be alone so I could huddle under my blankets and try to get warm. "Just sign here," she said, flipping to the last page and pointing with a perfectly manicured finger. Her nail was a glossy blood red. She held the clipboard steady for me, her finger strategically covering the paragraph above the signature line. "And here. And initial here." I looked at my son's wife, at the manufactured smile on her face, and then at the papers that represented a world of complexities I no longer had the strength to navigate. The fight had gone out of me, worn away by 1,000 small cuts. Signing seemed easier than arguing, easier than enduring the disappointed sighs and the cold silences that would surely follow if I refused. I took the cheap ballpoint pen she offered. My fingers were so numb I could barely hold it. With a shaky, spidery hand, I scrawled my name on the line she indicated. The signature was barely recognizable as my own, a testament to the cold and the fear that gripped me. It was the signature of a ghost. There. All done, she chirped, snatching the clipboard back with brisk efficiency. See? That wasn't so bad. She turned and went back up the stairs, her bright pink sweater a disappearing splash of color in the gloom. The heavy door at the top of the stairs clicked shut, leaving me in the silence and the cold. I sat on the edge of my cot, rubbing my frigid hands together. I didn't know what I had just done. I didn't know that the keys I had just handed her were not for a hospital room, but for the locks to my entire existence. I only knew that the basement suddenly felt much colder, the walls felt closer, and the air felt heavier, thick with the scent of my own regret. The night before my world was officially scheduled to end, the house was colder than usual. It was a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the coming blizzard and everything to do with the dying embers of affection. I was in my basement room, what Amanda generously called my suite, which was really just a glorified concrete box with a cot and a single high window that showed only the dirty boots of the mailman. I had come upstairs for a glass of water, my slippers making no sound on the plush runner I'd picked out years ago. They were in the kitchen, their backs to me, bathed in the sterile white light of the expensive under-cabinet LEDs they'd installed. They thought I was asleep. They always thought I was either asleep or deaf or both. Their voices were low, conspiratorial whispers that sliced through the humming silence of the refrigerator. It was Amanda who spoke first, her voice a smug, satisfied purr. The closing is set for the 30th mark. All the paperwork is in. The buyer's financing is solid. Mark's voice was a low rumble, laced with a weakness I knew all too well. And her. What about my mom? A sigh from Amanda, sharp and impatient. I told you we have it handled. The power of attorney is ironclad. She signed it herself. A small, cruel laugh escaped her lips. Bless her shaky little hands. She thought she was signing for emergency medical care. My own hand, the one holding the empty glass, began to tremble. I pressed myself back against the cool drywall of the hallway, shrinking into the shadows. Once the house sale closes, Amanda continued, her voice dropping even lower, as if savoring the finality of it, we'll use the power of attorney to process the paperwork and move her to that state facility in Sterling. The one with the long waiting list we got to skip because of her limited assets. The sneer in her tone was a physical thing. A shard of ice in my gut. It's clean enough. And it's far enough away. By the time anyone thinks to check on her, we'll be long gone. No one will even know. The glass slipped from my numb fingers. It didn't shatter on the thick runner, just thudded softly, a dull, muffled sound. The sound of a life hitting the floor. Up in the kitchen they didn't even pause. They hadn't heard. They were already discussing escrow, commissions, their trip to Bali. The word state facility and Sterling echoed in the cavern of my skull. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an erasure. They weren't just taking my house. They were taking my name, my future, my past, and locking it all away in a cinderblock room to be forgotten. The words froze my blood long before the storm arrived. A deep cellular cold that I knew would never leave me. I retreated back to my basement, the architect of my own cage, and listened to the first whispers of the wind, knowing it was singing a song of my own foolishness. The blizzard was a physical manifestation of my despair. It screamed and clawed at the house, the very house I had designed, whose bones I knew better than my own. And I was on the outside of it, a ghost haunting the wrong side of the door. After hours that felt like an eternity, huddled in the recessed entryway, my old coat a pathetic defense against the biting wind, I had finally stumbled through the deepening snow to my neighbor's house. Martha, a kind soul with worried eyes, had taken me in without a second thought, wrapping me in a thick wool blanket and pressing a mug of steaming tea into my trembling hands. I sat on her floral sofa, a refugee in my own neighborhood, watching the snow bury the world in a shroud of white. I thought it was over. I had lost. The cold had won. I spent a fitful night on that sofa, waking every hour with the echo of Amanda's words in my ears. The next morning the world outside was silent, pristine, and buried. The storm had passed, leaving behind a deceptive peace. I was staring out Martha's picture window, watching the slow, methodical work of a snowplow down the street, when a car I didn't recognize, a sleek black sedan, somehow navigated the partially cleared road and parked in front of her house. A man in a sharp, dark suit and a wool overcoat stepped out. He was older, with a mane of silver hair and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He moved with a purpose that seemed alien in the snow-dazed landscape, making his way carefully up Martha's shoveled walkway. A moment later, a firm, polite knock echoed through the quiet house. Martha went to the door, and I could hear the man's deep, calm voice. "Good morning. I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Arthur Graves. I'm looking for a Mrs. Violet Dubois. I was told she might be here." Martha called my name, her voice filled with a gentle curiosity. I shuffled to the door, pulling the borrowed blanket tighter around my shoulders. I felt ancient, brittle, a relic. The man's eyes, a piercing gray, met mine. They were serious but not unkind. There was a flicker of recognition, though I was certain I had never seen him before. "Mrs. Dubois," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone that commanded attention. "I am Arthur Graves. I was your late husband's attorney." He held out a gloved hand, not for a handshake, but as a gesture of introduction. David's attorney? David had handled all our finances, but I had met his corporate lawyers. This man was not one of them. My mind, sluggish from cold and grief, struggled to catch up. David's? I don't understand. Mr. Graves gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. David was a man who believed in planning for every eventuality. He retained my services for a very specific and very private matter. A matter he hoped would never become necessary. He paused, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Given the circumstances, I believe it is time to activate the winter contingency." Winter contingency. The phrase hung in the cold air between us. It sounded like something from a spy novel, not something connected to my quiet life, to my husband who was a simple accountant. Yet, the name sent a strange, unfamiliar shiver down my spine. A feeling that was not entirely born of fear. It was the first flicker of something else, something I hadn't felt in years. It was the ghost of a possibility. We sat at Martha's small kitchen table, the air thick with the smell of coffee and the unspoken questions hanging between us. Martha had discreetly made herself busy in another room, affording us a privacy for which I was grateful. Mr. Graves had opened a worn leather briefcase on the table, and the documents within looked severe and important. I had explained everything, the story tumbling out of me in a torrent of shame and pain. The financial support, signing over my savings, the basement room, the constant degradation, and finally, the piece of paper Amanda had thrust at me. "She said it was for medical emergencies," I whispered, the memory making my stomach clench. My hands were shaking. I was having a bad day. I didn't read it. I trusted them. Mr. Graves listened with an unnerving stillness. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just absorbed the information, his gray eyes fixed on me. When I was finished, he finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Dubois. Violet, what you signed was a durable power of attorney. It is a very powerful legal instrument." He slid a document across the table. It was a copy, but I recognized the dense, incomprehensible text and at the bottom my own spidery, wavering signature. It was a forgery of my own life. A signature stolen under false pretenses. Yet it was undeniably mine. "I had a feeling they might have done something like this," he said grimly. "David always said their ambition outpaced their morality. I took the liberty of running a preliminary check this morning." His words confirmed my deepest fear, giving it a legal binding shape. The power of attorney Amanda holds is, on its face, legally binding. It grants her broad authority over your financial and personal affairs. He paused, letting the weight of the sentence land. "And she has not wasted any time. They have already used it to take out 2 substantial loans against your name, using your sterling credit history. One is a home equity line of credit against this very house. The second is a personal loan, the proceeds of which have been deposited into an account solely in their names." The room seemed to tilt. They hadn't just planned to sell the house. They had been actively gutting its value, siphoning my life's work into their own pockets, all while I slept in the basement beneath their feet. "So it's true," I said, my voice hollow. "It's legal. They can do anything they want. They have a powerful legal document, Violet," he warned me, his expression grave. "It is a steep hill to climb. On paper, they control you. They can sell your property. They can make medical decisions for you. They can, as you overheard, commit you to a care facility. To a court, this document will look perfectly valid. Our first and greatest obstacle is proving it was obtained through fraud and coercion. And that, he finished, his eyes meeting mine with grim honesty, is never a simple task. The flicker of hope I'd felt at his arrival sputtered and died, smothered by the cold, hard weight of the law. I had not only been a fool, I had been an active participant in my own destruction. I had handed them the keys to my life, and now they had locked me out with them. The forgery was ironclad, and it was my own hand that had sealed my fate. The phone call came that afternoon. Martha brought me her cordless phone, her face etched with concern. "It's your son, Violet." My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't spoken to Mark since the door had been locked against me. My hand trembled as I took the phone. "Hello, Mom." Mark's voice was thick with manufactured tears. It was a sound I knew well, the same sound he'd used as a boy to get out of trouble, the same sound he'd used as a young man to ask for money. It was the sound of performance. "Oh, Mom, thank God. I was so worried. We've been calling everywhere. Where are you?" I remained silent, the lie catching in my throat. They knew exactly where I was. Amanda had watched me trudge through the snow to Martha's door from the living room window. "Mom, please come home," he sobbed, the sound wet and pathetic. "Amanda is a wreck. She's so sorry. It was a horrible mistake. We had a fight, a stupid, awful fight. She was angry and she just snapped. She didn't mean it. None of it. A mistake? Locking your 72-year-old mother out in a blizzard on her birthday was a mistake? It was such an audacious lie that for a moment I was speechless. "Please, Mom," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. You're tearing our family apart over a misunderstanding. This is our home. You're our family. We need you here. Just come home and we can talk this all out. We can fix this. Please." For a sickening moment my resolve wavered. It was the weapon they always used, the one they had sharpened over decades of practice. Guilt. I was the one tearing the family apart. I was the difficult one, the one causing the drama. The years of conditioning, the ingrained instinct to smooth things over, to keep the peace, to be the mother, rose up like a phantom limb. A part of me, a deep wounded part, wanted to believe him. It wanted to believe that the son I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, was still in there somewhere, buried beneath this weak, cruel man. It wanted the nightmare to be over. It wanted to go home, even if home was a cold basement. I looked over at Mr. Graves, who was watching me with a quiet, patient intensity. I saw the legal documents on the table, I heard the echo of Amanda's voice planning my disposal, and the illusion shattered. The weapon of guilt was the sharpest one they owned, but for the first time I could see the hand that was holding it. "Mark," I said, my voice quiet but colder than the wind outside. "There is nothing to talk about." I pressed the end button, cutting off his sputtering protests. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a silence of my own making. My resolve, which had wavered, was now hardening into something new, something that felt like steel. Mr. Graves gave a slow, approving nod. "That was the second obstacle, Violet. And perhaps the most difficult one. The legal battles are fought in courtrooms. The emotional ones are fought in here." He tapped his chest gently. "Now, I believe it is time we discuss the winter contingency." He reached back into his briefcase and retrieved a thick, leather-bound portfolio. He placed it on the table between us with a soft thud. It looked old and important. "Violet," he began, his tone shifting from that of a lawyer to that of a storyteller, "what did you believe your husband did for a living?" The question was so unexpected it threw me. "He was an accountant," I answered simply. "A partner at a firm downtown. He handled corporate accounts, audits, things like that." Mr. Graves looked at me, a small, sad smile touching the corners of his mouth. "That is what he told most people. And it was true to a point. But David wasn't just an accountant, Violet. He was a forensic accountant. One of the best in the country." Forensic accountant. The term was vaguely familiar. "You mean, he looked for fraud?" Precisely, Mr. Graves confirmed. He spent his life following paper trails, finding hidden assets, and uncovering sophisticated financial deceptions. He saw patterns that no one else could. He could look at a balance sheet and see not just the numbers, but the story behind them, the greed, the lies, the desperation. He saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, strengths and, most importantly, vulnerabilities. He opened the portfolio. The pages were filled with complex charts, legal deeds, and financial statements that made my head spin. David loved you more than anything, Violet. But he was not blind. He saw the patterns in Mark long before you were willing to. He saw the influence Amanda had over him. He saw their financial recklessness and their sense of entitlement. He saw this day coming not as a possibility, but as a statistical probability. My breath hitched. David had seen this? And he never said a word? He didn't tell you because he didn't want you to live your life in fear or suspicion, Mr. Graves said, as if reading my mind. He wanted you to have a loving relationship with your son for as long as you could. But he was a man who planned. So he didn't leave you a simple will. He left you a fortress. He turned a page to a document titled in bold, imposing letters, The David and Violet Dubois Irrevocable Trust. Years ago, after Mark's first business failed and you bailed him out with a significant portion of your savings, David took action. He worked with me to create this. An irrevocable trust. He transferred ownership of almost all of your major assets into it. The house in California, your stock portfolio, your retirement accounts, and most importantly, this very house. He tapped the deed for the house I was currently locked out of. Violet, when you sold your California home and used the money to pay Mark's debts and buy this property, you believed you were buying it in your name. But David structured the transaction through the trust. Legally, you have never been the owner of this house. The trust owns it. The world, which had been tilting all day, suddenly snapped into sharp, brilliant focus. The implications of his words began to dawn on me. A slow sunrise after a long, dark night. The trust, Mr. Graves continued, his voice resonating with the genius of my late husband's plan, is a separate legal entity, and it is irrevocable, meaning it cannot be altered or dissolved without the permission of the beneficiary. And the trust documents name only one sole, lifetime beneficiary. He turned the portfolio so I could see the final page, a single line of text standing out in stark clarity. Sole beneficiary, Violet Dubois. This house, your assets. They were never truly yours to give away, Violet, Mr. Graves said, the final beautiful truth landing with the force of a tectonic shift. They belong to the trust. The power of attorney that Amanda tricked you into signing is a powerful document, but it only gives her power over your personal assets and decisions. She cannot use it to sell, borrow against, or dispose of assets that you do not legally own. She and Mark have committed multiple felonies by taking out loans against a property that was never, ever theirs to leverage. An echo from the grave. This was David's final gift. He had seen the storm coming and had built me an ark. He had used his unique skills not just to count numbers, but to weigh character and find it wanting. The fortress he built wasn't made of stone and mortar, but of paper and law, a bastion of foresight and love. The cold that had settled in my bones began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning heat. It was the fire of anger, yes, but it was also the warmth of a plan, a strategy, a fight. They thought they had cornered a frail old woman. They had no idea they had just declared war on a fortress, and its queen was finally ready to fight back. The walk back was the longest of my life, each step a carefully measured beat in a symphony of deception. The wind had died down, but the cold remained, a physical presence that seeped through my coat and into my bones. It was a familiar cold now, a companion. I had felt it in my basement room, in my son's averted eyes, in my daughter-in-law's saccharine venomous voice. But this time it was different. This time I was wearing it like armor. Mr. Graves had offered to have someone drive me, but I refused. I needed this walk. I needed to rehearse the lines, to settle the mask of the broken woman firmly onto my face. I practiced the slump of my shoulders, the slight tremble in my hands, the downcast gaze of someone who had lost everything and knew it. By the time I reached the front walk, my front walk built with David's hands and my designs, I was no longer Violet, the architect, the wife, the mother. I was a ghost returning to haunt her own defeat. I didn't use the key Mr. Graves had reminded me was legally mine. That would be too bold. Instead, I raised a trembling hand and knocked softly. A timid tap-tap-tap against the solid oak door I had chosen myself for its warmth and strength. Took a moment. I could hear the muffled sounds of the television inside. A game show host's boisterous laughter. Then footsteps. The lock clicked, and the door opened a crack. Amanda's face, framed by perfectly styled blonde hair, peered out. Her eyes, the color of a pale winter sky, narrowed with suspicion and a flash of irritation. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp, a weapon she never sheathed. I let out a shaky breath, a puff of white in the frigid air. I made my eyes well up with tears, dredging up the memory of David's last days, the raw, real grief, and repurposing it for this performance. "Amanda," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Please. I have nowhere else to go. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." She didn't move. She just stared at me, her expression a mixture of contempt and curiosity. Mark appeared behind her, his face a mess of confusion and weak-willed anxiety. "Mom? What are you doing here?" I thought. I was a fool. I cut in, directing my words to him, knowing he was the softer target. A stupid, proud old woman. I misunderstood everything. I shouldn't have run off. I was just upset about my birthday. It was silly. I let a single perfect tear trace a path down my cold-nipped cheek. "Please, Mark. It's so cold. Can I just come in?" Mark's face softened with a pathetic sort of pity. He looked at Amanda, a silent plea in his eyes. This was the moment, the fulcrum on which the entire plan rested. If she said no, everything would be harder. But I knew Amanda. Her cruelty was matched only by her arrogance. The chance to have her defeated mother-in-law groveling at her feet would be a prize she couldn't resist. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across her lips. It was a predator's smile. "Well, look what the blizzard blew in," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. She opened the door wider. "I suppose we can't let you freeze. It would look bad." I stumbled inside, playing up the weakness in my limbs. The warmth of the house wrapped around me. A house that smelled of Amanda's expensive floral perfume, and the roast chicken they were clearly about to eat for dinner. I looked around the my living room, and saw how they had changed it. My tasteful minimalist furniture was now cluttered with garish cushions and cheap, trendy decor. A large, abstract painting I despised hung over the fireplace I had designed stone by stone. It was a violation. A quiet, steady rage, cold and hard as a diamond, began to form in my chest. I pushed it down, deep down. It would be my fuel. "Thank you," I murmured, keeping my eyes on the floor. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet," Amanda said, closing the door with a definitive thud. "Things are going to be different now. There are rules." Mark wrung his hands. "Amanda, honey, maybe we can just—" "No, Mark," she snapped, cutting him off without even looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on me. "She needs to understand her place. You ran out on us, Violet. You made a scene with the neighbors. That was unacceptable." "I know," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'm so ashamed. It won't happen again. Promise. I'll do whatever you want. I'll help more around the house. I won't be a burden." The word hung in the air, burden. It was their favorite word for me. Hearing it come from my own lips was like swallowing glass, but the effect on Amanda was exactly what I'd hoped for. Her whole body relaxed. The victory was total, absolute. She had not just won. She had made her opponent surrender unconditionally. "Good," she said, her smile widening. "That's a start." And then her eyes lit up with a particular, venomous kind of glee. She pulled out her phone. "Oh, this is just too good. The internet is going to love this." The screen glowed, the camera lens a tiny black, unblinking eye pointed directly at my face. "Amanda, no," Mark started, a flicker of decency trying to ignite within him before being instantly snuffed out by his own cowardice. "Oh, hush, Mark. It's a teachable moment," she cooed, starting a live video. Her face transformed for the camera. becoming a mask of beatific forgiveness and magnanimity. "Hey everyone! Look who's back!" she said to the phone, her voice syrupy. She panned the camera from her own smiling face to my bowed head. "My mother-in-law, Violet. We had a little misunderstanding, but she's seen the error of her ways and she's come home." I kept my head down, my shoulders hunched, my hands clasped in front of me like a penitent sinner. I could feel the invisible eyes of hundreds, maybe thousands, of strangers watching me in my moment of staged humiliation. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to snatch the phone and smash it against the wall, to unleash the fury I was holding back. But I thought of David. I thought of his meticulous planning, of Mr. Graves' calm, steady voice. "Patience, Violet. The actor does not break character until the final curtain. Family is all about forgiveness, isn't it?" Amanda continued, her voice radiating false warmth. "We're so happy to have her back where she belongs, safe and sound." She winked at the camera. "The prodigal grandma returns. Send us some hearts if you believe in second chances." She ended the video with a flourish, a smug look on her face. "There. Now the whole world knows how forgiving we are." She slipped the phone into her back pocket. "Now I believe there are dishes in the sink from lunch, and you can take your dinner in your room. We'll save you some leftovers." "Of course, dear," I said, my voice a meek whisper. "Thank you." I shuffled towards the kitchen, my back to them, and allowed a flicker of my true self to surface in a smile that was all teeth. She had no idea. She thought she was filming her victory. In reality, she had just filmed the prosecution's Exhibit A. My days fell into a new rhythm, a quiet, suffocating routine that was both a prison and a stage. On the surface, nothing had changed. I was still the ghost in the basement, the silent servant they tolerated. I woke before them, making their coffee just the way Amanda liked it, a ridiculous concoction of oat milk, 2.5 stevia packets, and a sprinkle of cinnamon. I cleaned the house, scrubbing floors on my hands and knees until my back ached, the scent of bleach a constant in my nostrils. I did their laundry, folding Mark's shirts with the precision of an architect drawing a blueprint, a task that once felt like an act of love, and now felt like gathering evidence. My meals were still their leftovers, scraped onto the same chipped plastic plate and eaten in the silence of my cold basement room. The room was always damp, a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. It was the chill of neglect. But now it didn't feel like a prison, felt like a bunker, a command center. Down here I was not the broken bird. I was the general reviewing the battle plans in my mind. While I scrubbed a wine stain Amanda had left on the white living room rug, a testament to a party I wasn't invited to, my thoughts were miles away. In a warm wood-paneled office, I pictured Mr. Graves, a man with the quiet intensity of an owl, his desk covered in documents. While my hands were raw from soap and water, his were methodically filing paperwork, each form a stone being laid in the foundation of our case. He would be poring over bank statements, his pen highlighting extravagant purchases, a $5,000 handbag, a weekend trip to a spa resort, a down payment on a new luxury car. All paid for with the 2 fraudulent loans Amanda had secured with the power of attorney she tricked me into signing. All under my name, my credit, my reputation, being systematically destroyed to fund her vapid lifestyle. One evening, Amanda was scrolling through her phone at the dinner table, a habit I found infuriatingly rude. She let out a little laugh and turned the screen towards Mark. "Look at this. Over 200,000 views. The comments are amazing. You're a saint, Amanda. I wish my family was this forgiving." She glanced over at me where I was standing by the sink, pretending to be engrossed in washing a pot. "See, Violet? People appreciate what I did for you. What we did. You should be more grateful." "I am, dear," I said, my voice perfectly even. "I am very grateful." Inside I was cataloging the post. 200,000 views. That was 200,000 potential witnesses. Mr. Graves had been clear. Her social media was a goldmine. It was a real-time, self-documented confession of her cruelty and her financial crimes, all wrapped up in hashtags and filtered smiles. He had a team, he told me, that was archiving every single post, every story, every comment. Amanda thought she was building a brand. She was actually building the case against herself. There was the TikTok she'd posted a week after I came back. It was a short, sped-up video of me cleaning the windows, set to some ridiculous upbeat music. The caption read, "Grandma's staying busy and earning her keep. So proud of her progress. Family First Elderly Care making memories." It had garnered over 500,000 likes. 500,000 people had liked a video of my humiliation. Mr. Graves called it Exhibit B. Documented forced labor and emotional abuse. Then there were the photos of her lavish spending. A selfie of her in a new convertible, the wind whipping through her hair. Finally got my dream car. Hard work pays off. Blessed new whip. The timestamp on the post was 2 days after the second loan was approved. Mr. Graves called that Exhibit C, direct correlation of fraudulent funds to major asset purchase. My life became a delicate balancing act. The meek, subservient woman they saw was a carefully constructed fiction. Every time Amanda sneered, "You smell like old paper and regrets," I would just nod meekly and apologize. But in my mind I would hear Mr. Graves' voice. "Let her talk, Violet. Every insult is a nail in her coffin." Every time Mark would walk past me as if I were invisible, my heart would ache with the ghost of the little boy he used to be. But my resolve would harden. He had made his choice. He had chosen his wife's vanity over his mother's dignity. Communication with Mr. Graves was sparse and dangerous. He had given me a small prepaid burner phone, the kind you see in spy movies. It felt absurdly dramatic, but he insisted it was necessary. Amanda was paranoid and possessive. She had accidentally gone through my things before. I kept the phone hidden in a hollowed-out book, an old copy of The Art of War that had been David's. The irony was not lost on me. Once a week at precisely 2 a.m. I would creep up from the basement. The house would be silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the pipes. I'd slip into the small pantry off the kitchen, closing the door softly behind me, and dial the number I had memorized. The air in the pantry was thick with the smell of spices and dry goods. It was cramped and dark, but in those moments it felt like the safest place on earth. "It's me," I'd whisper into the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello, Violet," Mr. Graves' voice would come back, always calm, always reassuring. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I'd reply, and it was the truest thing I said all week. I was fine because I had a purpose. "What's the news?" He would give me quiet, methodical updates. The forensic accountants had finished tracing the money. The private investigator had interviewed the neighbor who took me in on my birthday. They had a sworn affidavit. They had managed to get a statement from a disgruntled former employee at Mark's failed startup, detailing how he'd used my initial investment, my entire California house fund, to pay for personal luxuries long before the business officially went under. "Amanda's online persona is our greatest asset," he told me during one of our calls. "She can't help but brag. She's arrogant, and arrogant people make mistakes. She's creating an irrefutable public record of neglect and financial malfeasance. When we present this to a judge, her lawyer won't have anywhere to hide." During that same call, he told me something that made the cold in my basement room feel like a roaring fire. "The trust your husband set up, Violet. It's a thing of beauty, an ironclad fortress." When she signed the papers to sell the house, she was attempting to sell property that was never legally yours to give, and therefore never hers to control or sell. It's called fraud in the inducement. A felony. Hanging up the phone after those calls, I would creep back down to my room, the cold metal of the burner phone a talisman in my hand. I would sit on the edge of my lumpy mattress and feel David's presence so strongly it was as if he were sitting beside me, his hand on my shoulder. He had seen this. He had known the weakness in our son, the avarice in the woman he married. He couldn't protect me from their cruelty in the day-to-day, but he had built me an escape hatch. He had built me a weapon, and now I was finally learning how to wield it. One afternoon I was folding laundry in the utility room, the rhythmic snap of sheets a meditative sound. Amanda came in, holding up her phone, a furious expression on her face. "Did you shrink my cashmere sweater?" she demanded, shoving the phone in my face to show me an email. It was an alert from a credit monitoring service. My heart leaped into my throat. Mr. Graves' investigation was stirring the waters. An inquiry from a law firm? She read aloud, her eyes narrowing at me. Why would a law firm be running a credit check on you? I forced my expression into one of utter, bovine confusion. I looked at the phone, squinting as if I couldn't read the small print. A law firm? Oh my. I have no idea, dear. That's very strange. Maybe it's a mistake? You know how these computer things are. Don't play dumb with me, Violet, she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. I summoned the image of the broken bird, the pathetic creature I had been pretending to be for weeks. I let my shoulders slump. Amanda, I wouldn't know how to even begin to contact a law firm. I don't have any money. I don't have anything. You know that. I looked down at my hands, red and chapped from housework. What would I even need a lawyer for? My performance was flawless. My weakness was my alibi. She stared at me for a long moment, her suspicious mind trying to find a crack in my story. But all she saw was a frail, useless old woman who was more of a piece of furniture than a person. Her anger subsided, replaced by her usual dismissive contempt. You're right, she scoffed. What a stupid question. You probably signed up for some free trial nonsense years ago and forgot about it. She waved her hand dismissively and walked away, already absorbed back into her phone, her moment of suspicion forgotten. I finished folding the laundry, my hands moving with steady precision, but inside I was vibrating with a terrifying, exhilarating energy. They were getting close. The quiet before the storm was almost over. The first drops of rain were beginning to fall. I just had to hold on. I had to keep playing my part, washing their dishes, scrubbing their floors, and absorbing their scorn, all while Mr. Graves assembled the thunder and the lightning. The storm was coming for them, and I, the little broken bird, was the one who was going to call it down. The sound was the first assault, a thumping synthetic bass line that vibrated up from the basement, through the floorboards I had once hand-selected, and into the worn armchair where I sat, a ghost at my own wake. They threw a party, a big one. The kind of party this house, a place my David and I had designed for quiet conversations and the scent of baking bread, had never known. Outside, staked into the lawn David had spent years perfecting, was a giant garish sign. In thick, triumphant red letters it screamed sold. The word felt like a physical blow, a final erasure of our life here. From my corner I watched them. Mark, my son, moved through the crowd with a forced, brittle cheerfulness, his eyes never quite meeting mine. He was a shadow of the boy I'd raised, hollowed out and filled with his wife's ambition. And then there was Amanda. She was the star, the sun around which this cheap, glittering solar system revolved. Dressed in something too tight and too bright, she held her phone up like a scepter, a permanent extension of her arm. She was on Instagram Live, of course. Her audience of strangers was more real to her than the mother-in-law shrinking into the floral print chair a few feet away. Oh my God, you guys, thank you for all the love. She squealed into the phone, her voice cutting through the electronic beat. She panned the camera across the crowded living room. A sea of faces I didn't know, people drinking cheap Prosecco from plastic flutes. It's been a long time coming, but we finally did it. The house is sold. We are officially moving on up. A smattering of whoops and applause followed. Amanda beamed, her teeth a predatory white. She took a long performative sip from her glass, then turned the camera back to her face, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. Cheers to our new chapter, she said, raising her glass to the phone. Then her eyes, sharp and cold as ice picks, flicked over to me. A slow, malicious smile spread across her lips as she winked at her invisible audience. And to getting rid of old baggage. The comment landed in the room and hung there. An ugly, invisible stain. A few of her friends snickered. Mark, who was standing nearby, flinched but said nothing. He just busied himself by needlessly rearranging a stack of napkins. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. I was baggage. Not a person, not a mother, but an inconvenient suitcase to be discarded. I looked down at my hands folded in my lap. My knuckles were white. The frail, defeated woman they saw was a carefully constructed facade, a role I had been playing for weeks. But inside, a cold, hard knot of anticipation was tightening. The storm was coming. I had only to wait for it to break. Amanda continued her broadcast, walking through the rooms of my life and describing her grand plans for her new much bigger house. And the best part, she was saying, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, is we finally found a place for Mark's mom. A nice little community, for people you know like her. She'll have so many friends her own age. It's for the best. She made it sound like an act of profound charity. A state-run facility with linoleum floors and the smell of bleach, paid for with the last dregs of my own money she had systematically siphoned away. I felt a tremor of the old despair, the helpless rage that had been my constant companion for months. But I pushed it down. I focused on the memory of Mr. Graves' voice, calm and steady over the phone just this morning. Patience, Violet. The stage is set. Let her enjoy her performance. The final act is yours. So I sat. I watched. I endured. I let the pitying or dismissive glances of the guests wash over me. I was the drab gray rock on their glittering beach, an object to be navigated around and ignored. The music pulsed on. The laughter grew louder, shriller. Amanda's friend, a woman with hair the color of a chemical fire, stumbled over to me. "You must be so proud of them," she slurred, gesturing vaguely with her plastic cup. "Mark and Amanda. Such a power couple. And so generous to take care of you." I offered her a small watery smile. Yes, very generous. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but it was a necessary poison. The minutes ticked by, stretching into an hour, then another. The party reached its fever pitch. People were dancing now, their bodies jerking to the relentless beat. The air was thick with the smell of spilled alcohol and cheap perfume. It was then that I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker, a silent, rhythmic pulse of color washing over the living room window. Blue, red, blue, red. A silent, ghostly disco ball that no one else seemed to notice. I kept my eyes on the window. The flashes grew stronger, painting the walls in momentary strokes of emergency. A few people near the front of the house paused, their conversations faltering. A woman frowned. "Is that?" The doorbell didn't ring. There was a knock. 3 hard, authoritative raps that cut through the music like a judge's gavel. The music producer wannabe in the corner, who had been twisting knobs on a laptop, finally seemed to notice the shift in the room and faded the volume down. The sudden, relative quiet was deafening. Every head turned towards the door. Mark, looking pale and confused, started to move towards it. But Amanda, ever the master of her domain, waved him back. She rolled her eyes dramatically for her phone's audience, which was still dutifully recording. "Hold on, guys, the fun police are here," she stage whispered into the mic. She sauntered to the door, a look of theatrical annoyance on her face. "A noise complaint?" she scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear, before she even opened the door. "Seriously? It's not even 11. She pulled the door open, a smug, dismissive smile already in place. But the smile froze, then slowly melted from her face. Standing on the porch were not 1, but 2 uniformed police officers. Their faces were impassive, their posture rigid. And behind them, a woman in a sensible tweed coat holding a briefcase. A social worker. The flashing lights from their patrol car in the driveway bathed Amanda in a strobing, accusatory glare. "Good evening," the taller officer said. His voice was calm, deep, and held no room for argument. "Are you Amanda Dubois?" Amanda's phone was still held high, the lens a black, unblinking eye. The thousands of people watching her livestream were now watching this. The sudden terrifying shift from a party to a police intervention was being broadcast for the world to see. "Yes, I am," Amanda said, her voice a little tight. She was trying to recover, to regain control of the scene. "Look, if this is about the music, I'm sorry. We'll be quieter. No need for all this drama." She gestured with a flippant wave of her hand, as if dismissing them. The officer, whose name tag read Miller, didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He looked past her, his eyes scanning the room, and for a brief moment they met mine. I gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He turned his attention back to Amanda. "We aren't here for the noise, ma'am," he said, his tone flat and official. The party was now completely silent. Every guest was a statue, frozen in place, their drinks held halfway to their lips. The air crackled with a tension so thick I could taste it. Amanda Dubois, Officer Miller continued, his voice resonating with a terrible finality. You are under arrest for elder abuse, aggravated identity theft, and felony wire fraud. For a full second there was nothing, just the silent, pulsing lights. Amanda's face went completely blank. The words didn't seem to register. It was like watching a computer crash. The screen freezes before the system shuts down entirely. Then a choked, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. What? Are you kidding me? This is insane. This is a joke. She looked around the room at Mark, at her friends, searching for someone to join in on the absurdity. No one moved. No one spoke. Mark looked like he was going to be sick. The second officer stepped forward, producing a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as they opened was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Reality finally slammed into Amanda. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, terrified mask. No, you can't, she shrieked, her voice cracking. She took a step back, her free hand clutching her phone like a talisman. I haven't done anything. I have power of attorney. It's all legal. I have the paperwork. She was shouting now, her voice raw with panic. Mark, tell them. Tell them it's all fine. Tell them she wanted me to have it. All eyes swiveled to my son. Mark stood there, paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. No words came out. He just stared at the officers, then at his wife, then at me, his eyes wide with a pathetic, dawning horror. He had been a passenger in his own life for so long, he had forgotten how to drive. Ma'am, you need to put the phone down and place your hands behind your back, Officer Miller said, his voice still unnervingly calm. No, Amanda screamed, backing away further into the house. This is harassment. I'm a victim here. She's a confused old woman. I was helping her. The power of attorney gives me the right. It gives me the right. It was her mantra, her shield. The piece of paper she had tricked me into signing. The weapon she had wielded with such vicious pride. She clung to it as if it were a holy relic that could ward off this nightmare. And that's when he stepped forward. He seemed to emerge from the shadows of the porch, moving from behind the officers with a quiet, deliberate grace. Mr. Arthur Graves. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair was neatly combed, and his expression was one of serene, almost placid disappointment. He looked completely out of place in the gaudy, chaotic party, a figure of sober reality in a world of cheap illusion. He stopped in the doorway, his calm presence commanding the entire room. Amanda stared at him, her frantic tirade cut short. Confusion warred with fear on her face. Mr. Graves, Officer Miller said with a respectful nod. Mr. Graves inclined his head slightly. He looked directly at Amanda, his gaze as sharp and penetrating as a surgeon's scalpel. That document is void, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. Each word perfectly enunciated. Each syllable a nail in Amanda's coffin. Amanda just stared, dumbfounded. What are you talking about? Who are you? I am Arthur Graves, he said calmly. I was your late father-in-law's attorney, and I am the executor of his estate. The power of attorney you coerced from Violet is null and void for a very simple reason. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You attempted to use it to sell a property you have no legal claim to. A collective, muffled gasp went through the room. Amanda's jaw went slack. No legal, it's her house. She signed it over. Mr. Graves gave a small, sad shake of his head, as if explaining a complex theorem to a child. No, she didn't. Because she couldn't. This house, along with the majority of David and Violet's assets, was placed into an irrevocable trust upon my client's death 12 years ago. It is not Violet's property to give or to sell. It is the property of the David Dubois Family Trust. He let that sink in. The word trust hung in the air. A word Amanda understood only in the context of betrayal. Mr. Graves continued, his tone becoming colder, more precise. Violet is the sole lifetime beneficiary of that trust. She is entitled to live here and be supported by its assets for the remainder of her natural life. You, Mrs. Dubois, have no legal standing whatsoever. The documents you had her sign, the loans you took out in her name against this property, the very sale you are celebrating tonight, it is all predicated on a massive criminal fraud. You didn't just try to defraud a vulnerable elderly woman. You tried to defraud a legally ironclad trust, an entity you just tried to sell a multi-million-dollar asset from, for which you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Amanda's face had crumpled. The mask of the beautiful, successful influencer was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed, terrified face of a common thief caught in the act. The phone in her hand drooped, the camera now pointing at the floor, but the red light was still on. Her humiliation was still being broadcast to the world. Then Mr. Graves delivered the final, elegant, killing blow. He gestured towards the sold sign on the lawn, visible through the large picture window. "And your buyer?" he said, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. The cash offer that was too good to be true? He wasn't a tech mogul from California. He was a private investigator from my firm. Every email, every text message, every phone call you had with him has been recorded as evidence. That was it. The final trapdoor opened beneath Amanda's feet, and she plunged into the abyss. A strangled animal sound escaped her throat. She finally dropped the phone. It clattered to the hardwood floor, the screen cracking. The party was over. The officers moved in, their movements swift and professional. One took her by the arm while the other cuffed her hands behind her back. She didn't fight anymore. All the arrogance, all the fire was gone. She was just a woman in a cheap, bright dress. Her shoulders slumped in utter defeat. As they led her past me, her eyes wide and glassy with shock met mine. In them I saw it all. The disbelief, the hatred, the dawning horrific understanding that the frail, stupid old woman in the corner had outplayed her at every turn. I held her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply looked at her, my expression calm, and I let her see the woman she had tried to erase. The architect. The wife. The mother. The survivor. The true owner of this house. And in that final silent exchange she knew. She knew she hadn't just lost a house. She had lost everything. And it was too late. The sound of Amanda's phone hitting the polished oak floor was a sharp, synthetic clatter that cut through the sudden, thick silence. It landed screen up, a perfect, glowing rectangle of chaos in the wreckage of her party. The live stream didn't stop. It kept broadcasting, the camera now pointing at the ceiling, catching the distorted reflections of flashing red and blue lights in the glass of the modern chandelier I had picked out years ago. A river of tiny scrolling comments flowed ceaselessly up the side of the screen, a digital Greek chorus witnessing her downfall in real time. I could almost hear their voices, a cascade of laughing emojis, shocked faces and hashtags that were likely already trending. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping around her wrists was louder than any shout. It was a sound of finality, a full stop at the end of a long, cruel sentence. Amanda's face, the one she had so carefully curated for her audience, crumbled. It was a slow-motion implosion. The smug smirk, the condescending arch of her brow, the look of bored superiority. It all dissolved into a mask of raw, unfiltered shock. Her mouth hung open, a perfect O of disbelief. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, blotchy canvas of terror. This was a face no filter could fix. This was the unvarnished truth of her, broadcast for the entire world to see. Her followers, the thousands of strangers she had courted with a fabricated life, were now her jury. The title would write itself. Influencer arrested live. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. The very tool she used to humiliate me, to turn my private pain into public entertainment, was now preserving her own ignominy for eternity. She finally found her voice, a ragged, desperate thing that bore no resemblance to her usual smooth, syrupy tone. "You can't do this," she shrieked, twisting against the officer's firm grip. Her eyes, wide and frantic, darted around the room, searching for an ally, a lifeline. They swept past the stunned faces of her friends, The ones who had laughed at her jokes about me just an hour before. Now they stood frozen, champagne flutes held limply in their hands, their expressions a mixture of morbid curiosity and a desperate desire to be anywhere else. They looked away, studying their shoes, the artwork on the walls, anything but her. Her gaze landed on Mark, her voice pleading. Mark, do something. Tell them this is a mistake. But Mark was a statue carved from cowardice. He just stood there, his own face ashen, his body rigid. The officer, a woman with a calm, tired face, began to read Amanda her rights. The familiar words so often heard in movies sounded alien and brutal in my living room. You have the right to remain silent. Each word was a nail in the coffin of the life Amanda had built. She continued to struggle, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. This is because of her. That old woman. She's lying. Look at her, she's senile. She pointed a cuffed hand in my direction. For the first time all evening, every eye in the room turned to me. I didn't flinch. I simply stood by the doorway, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, and met their gazes. I offered no explanation, no flicker of triumph. I was just a quiet observer at the end of a long, painful film. The police led her away, her shrill protests echoing down the hall before being swallowed by the closing front door. The party guests began to disperse, melting away like phantoms. There were no goodbyes, just the quiet shuffle of feet and the soft clicks of the door closing behind them. They left behind a scene of abrupt abandonment. Half-empty glasses sweating on the tables, a plate of exquisite canapés untouched, a silk scarf dropped on the floor. The house, which had been thrumming with false laughter and loud music, was now filled with a heavy, humming silence, punctuated only by the crackle of the fireplace. That's when the second officer, a tall man with a gentle expression, turned to my son. Mr. Hatcher, he said, his voice low and professional, we need you to come down to the station. You're a person of interest in this investigation. Mark's entire body seemed to deflate. A person of interest? He stammered, the words catching in his throat. But I didn't do anything. His eyes finally found mine, and in them I saw a lifetime of weakness. There was a desperate, childish plea in his look, the same look he'd given me when he was a boy and had broken a neighbor's window. He was waiting for me to fix this, to smooth it over, to protect him from the consequences of his own choices, as I had done so many times before. I held his gaze, but I said nothing. The well of my maternal instinct to save him had finally run dry, leaving behind only arid, cracked earth. His silence had been his consent. His inaction had been his weapon. He had stood by and watched as his wife dismantled my life, piece by piece, and he had done nothing. There were no words left between us. I had spoken my piece in the years of quiet suffering, in the meals eaten alone, in the dignity I had struggled to maintain while they tried to strip it all away. My silence now was the loudest thing in the room. He seemed to understand. A tremor ran through him, and he looked down at the floor, a broken man. He followed the officer out without another word. Mr. Graves and the social worker spoke in hushed tones for a moment before they, too, departed, giving me a nod of quiet solidarity. And then I was alone. The silence that descended was absolute. It was a physical presence, filling the spaces left behind by the chaos. It wasn't an empty silence but a clean one, a healing one. The air no longer felt thick with resentment and contempt. It was just air. I walked over to the small ceramic bowl by the door, the one I had placed there when David and I first moved in. My fingers brushed past Mark and Amanda's gaudy, oversized keychains and found the simple, familiar brass key to the front door. It was cool and solid in my palm. I stepped onto the porch, the biting cold of the winter air a clean shock against my skin. The police cars were gone. The street was empty, blanketed in a pristine layer of fresh snow that muffled all sound. I turned back, inserted the key into the lock, and turned it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was deep and resonant, a chord of finality that vibrated through the very frame of the house. I locked it. I locked them out of my home. I locked them out of my life. Now the house is quiet. It is mine. Every beam, every nail, every pane of glass. I walk through the rooms, a stranger in a familiar land, rediscovering my own territory. The living room is a ghost of a party, a testament to their greed. I don't feel anger looking at the abandoned champagne glasses and discarded napkins. I feel a profound sense of peace. This wasn't an act of revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was an act of design. It was my husband's final blueprint. I can almost see him, sitting at his drafting table, his brow furrowed in concentration, sketching out not a building, but a fortress of love and protection around me. He had seen the fault lines in our son's character long before I was willing to admit them. He knew that one day I might be vulnerable. The trust, the secret plan, the patient Mr. Graves, it was all his final brilliant design. A safety net woven with foresight and love. It was a trap, yes, but not one born of malice. It was a trap for their greed, their cruelty, their utter disregard for family. They were so busy trying to build a cage for me, meticulously constructing the walls with their lies, their forgeries, and their abuse. They were so focused on the frail old woman in the basement that they never once looked down to see the floor give way beneath their own feet. They never realized they were the ones already in the cage, a cage of their own making, and that I was the one holding the key all along. I walked to the large picture window in the living room, the one I designed to perfectly frame the old oak tree in the yard. Outside, the world is hushed and white. The furious driving blizzard has stopped. The wind that howled with such menace has died down to a whisper. Soft, fat snowflakes are beginning to drift lazily from a clearing sky, each one a tiny star descending to rest. The storm has passed. I place my hand against the cool glass, looking out at the clean, unbroken landscape. A deep warmth spreads through my chest, a gentle heat that pushes its way through my veins and into my fingertips. It's a feeling I had forgotten. It's the feeling of safety, of peace, of freedom. And for the first time in years I am not cold.